The humid Florida air clung to everything in Miami's Wynwood district, where the smell of salt water mixed with grilled meats and Latin spices created an intoxicating atmosphere that drew tourists and locals alike. Victor Castellanos had built his empire here, a restaurant called La Perla Negra that served what food critics called the most exquisite meat dishes south of Atlanta. The place was always packed, reservations booked weeks in advance, and Victor's face graced the covers of regional culinary magazines at least twice a year. Victor wasn't born into wealth or privilege. He came from nothing, raised in the swamps of the Everglades by a father who worked as a gator hunter and a mother who cleaned hotel rooms in Miami Beach. By the time he was 12, Victor could skin an alligator faster than anyone in 3 counties. His father taught him the delicate art of butchery, how to separate meat from bone with surgical precision, how to identify the tender cuts from the tough ones, and most importantly, how to waste nothing. In the wetlands, waste meant starvation, but Victor wanted more than swamp life. At 18, he moved to Miami with $200 in his pocket and a duffel bag full of knives. He worked his way up through kitchens, starting as a dishwasher, then prep cook, then line cook. He absorbed everything, watching celebrity chefs, studying techniques, learning the business from every angle. By 30, he had saved enough to open his own place. La Perla Negra became his masterpiece, a fusion restaurant that combined his southern roots with Caribbean flavors and upscale presentation. The secret to Victor's success wasn't just his skill with seasoning or his eye for plating. It was the meat itself. Customers raved about the texture, the depth of flavor, the way it practically melted on the tongue. Food bloggers wrote detailed posts analyzing the unique taste profile. One critic from the Miami Herald described it as primal, almost intoxicatingly rich. Victor would simply smile when asked about his suppliers, offering vague answers about exclusive farms and proprietary aging techniques. Behind the gleaming kitchen and the 5-star reviews, Victor maintained a secondary workspace that no one else could access. A locked room in the basement, accessible only through a reinforced steel door that required both a key and a code. Even his head chef, a talented Cuban woman named Rosa, who had been with him for 5 years, had never set foot inside. When she asked about it once, Victor's expression hardened in a way that made her never ask again. He told everyone it was for dry-aging expensive cuts of meat, a climate-controlled environment that required exact conditions. The truth was far darker. Victor had discovered something during his years of butchering animals in the Everglades. The process was the same whether you were working with a gator, a deer, or something else entirely. The cuts, the techniques, the preservation methods, they all translated. And Victor had learned that some suppliers were willing to provide inventory that never appeared on any invoice, never had a paper trail, and commanded prices that made traditional beef look like pocket change. It started small, a body that needed to disappear, delivered to him by men with connections to Miami's underground. They paid him handsomely, and Victor handled the disposal with the same efficiency he brought to everything else. But then he realized something. The meat was pristine, fresh, and when properly prepared, virtually indistinguishable from premium game. Why waste it? Victor began experimenting, incorporating small amounts into his dishes, always mixed with legitimate meats to mask any irregularities. The results were extraordinary. His restaurant's popularity exploded. Over 3 years, Victor perfected his system. The men who brought him bodies thought he was simply disposing of evidence. They had no idea he was serving their problems to Miami's elite, to tourists celebrating anniversaries, to families gathered for special occasions. Victor kept meticulous records in encrypted files, tracking everything. 12 people had passed through his basement in the last 18 months alone. He knew their names, their dates, and which menu items they became. Then he met Sofia Reyes. She walked into La Perla Negra on a Friday night wearing a red dress that made every head in the restaurant turn. Victor noticed her immediately from his usual spot near the open kitchen, where he liked to observe the dining room. She was there with friends, celebrating something, laughing in that uninhibited way that suggested too many mojitos. But her eyes kept drifting toward him, holding his gaze a moment too long each time. Victor sent over a complimentary dessert. Sophia sent back her number written on a napkin. Within a week, they were tangled in Egyptian cotton sheets at his penthouse overlooking Biscayne Bay. Sophia was 28, 11 years younger than Victor, working as a real estate agent for luxury properties in South Beach. She was ambitious, cunning, and had a taste for the finer things in life that Victor's money could easily provide. Their affair was volcanic. Sophia loved the danger of it, the secrecy, the expensive gifts and weekend trips to the Keys. Victor loved having someone who matched his intensity, who didn't ask questions about his work, who simply enjoyed the lifestyle he provided. For 8 months it was perfect. Sophia knew Victor was obsessively private about his business, knew there were parts of his life she wasn't allowed to touch. She respected those boundaries because the benefits outweighed her curiosity. But Sophia was also reckless. She liked to show off on social media, posting photos from exclusive restaurants, designer shopping bags, private yacht excursions. She was careful never to tag Victor, never to show his face, but anyone paying attention could piece together that she had a wealthy benefactor. And people were paying attention, including Victor's legitimate business partners, the investors who had helped him expand, the health inspectors he regularly paid off, and the men who brought him his special deliveries. One of those men, a fixer named Carlos, who worked for a Cuban organized crime family, pulled Victor aside one evening during a delivery. "Your girlfriend talks too much," Carlos said, lighting a cigarette in the alley behind the restaurant. "She's been asking people questions, trying to figure out what you're really doing." Victor's blood went cold. "What kind of questions?" Carlos exhaled smoke, "The kind that gets people disappeared." "You need to handle this." Victor assured Carlos it would be handled, but inside panic was setting in. He had been so careful, so methodical. How could Sophia have figured anything out? He went through their conversations in his mind, searching for any slip-up, any moment where he might have revealed too much. Then he remembered. 2 weeks ago, Sophia had surprised him at the restaurant late at night. She claimed she wanted to be spontaneous, to see him in his element. Victor had been in the middle of processing a delivery. He had rushed upstairs, his apron still slightly stained, his hands freshly washed, but his demeanor clearly agitated. Sophia had noticed. She always noticed everything. And now, apparently, she was asking questions. Victor knew what he had to do, even if the thought of it made something twist uncomfortably in his chest. Sophia wasn't just a casual fling anymore. Somewhere along the way, between the late-night conversations and the moments of unexpected tenderness, she had become more than that. But Victor's survival instinct was stronger than any emotion. He had built too much, risked too much to let anyone threaten his empire. He called Sophia that night, his voice warm and affectionate. "Baby, I've been working too hard. Let's take a break, just us. Come to the restaurant tomorrow night after closing. I'll cook something special just for you." Sophia's delighted laughter through the phone made Victor's jaw tighten. She had no idea what was coming. She thought she was being clever, thought she could uncover his secrets and somehow use them. But Victor had been surviving on instinct since childhood, and he always stayed 3 steps ahead. As he ended the call and stared out at the Miami skyline glittering with lights, Victor felt the familiar coldness settle over him. The same coldness that allowed him to do what others couldn't. Tomorrow night, Sophia would learn that some secrets were deadly, and Miami would continue eating at La Perla Negra, never knowing that their favorite chef had just added another name to his list. The heat of the Florida night pressed against the windows, thick and suffocating, as Victor began planning the final meal he would ever prepare for the woman who had made the fatal mistake of getting too curious. Sophia spent the entire next day in a state of giddy anticipation. She posted a cryptic Instagram story, a photo of her freshly manicured nails with the caption, "Special night ahead," followed by a champagne emoji. Her friends texted her immediately, demanding details, but she kept them guessing. That was part of the thrill for Sophia, the mystery. The sense that she was living a life others could only dream about. She had been digging into Victor's background for weeks now, ever since that strange night when she had shown up unannounced. Something about his reaction had triggered her instincts. Sophia had grown up in Miami's rougher neighborhoods before clawing her way into the luxury real estate world. She knew how to read people, how to spot when someone was hiding something significant. And Victor, despite his charm and his success, had secrets that ran deeper than a hidden bank account or a second family. Her inquiries had been subtle at first, casual questions to mutual acquaintances about where Victor sourced his meat. Friendly conversations with restaurant suppliers who seemed confused when she mentioned La Perla Negra, claiming they had never done business with Victor. Her chance encounter with a health inspector at a bar who had too many drinks and mentioned something about payments to look the other way. None of it was conclusive, but it painted a picture that made Sophia's pulse quicken with a mixture of fear and excitement. She wasn't planning to expose Victor. That would be idiotic and dangerous. But knowledge was power, and Sophia believed that understanding his secrets would give her leverage, a way to secure her position in his life more permanently, maybe even become a partner in whatever side business he was running. She had always been ambitious, always willing to cross lines that others wouldn't. That was how you survived in Miami if you weren't born with money. By 7 that evening, Sophia arrived at La Perla Negra wearing a black dress that hugged her curves perfectly. The restaurant was dark, closed for the night as Victor had promised. She used the key he had given her months ago to enter through the front door. The dining room was eerily quiet, chairs stacked on tables, the usual vibrant energy replaced by shadows and silence. Only the kitchen glowed with warm light, and she could hear the rhythmic sound of knife against cutting board. Victor looked up as she entered, his smile wide and welcoming. "You look stunning," he said, wiping his hands on a pristine white towel. "Come here." Sophia walked into his arms, breathing in his cologne, mixed with the savory aroma of whatever he was preparing. He kissed her deeply, his hands sliding down her back. "Tonight is all about us," he murmured against her lips. "No distractions, no interruptions. Just you, me, and the best meal you've ever had." The kitchen was Victor's domain, and watching him work was always mesmerizing. His movements were precise, almost ritualistic. Tonight he was preparing something special, he explained. A dish he had never served anyone else, using techniques passed down from his father. The meat was already marinating, a rich, dark color that Sophia couldn't quite identify. "What kind is it?" she asked, running her finger along the edge of the counter. Victor's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "A secret blend. Trust me, you'll love it." While Victor focused on the stove, Sophia wandered around the kitchen, sipping the expensive wine he had poured for her. She had been here dozens of times, but always when the staff was present, always with the controlled chaos of dinner service happening around them. Tonight, the emptiness made her notice things she hadn't before, like the steel door at the back of the kitchen, partially hidden behind a rack of pots and pans. She had never seen anyone go through it. Her curiosity got the better of her. "What's back there?" she asked, gesturing toward the door with her wineglass. Victor's shoulders tensed imperceptibly. "Storage. Nothing interesting." His tone was casual, but Sophia caught the edge in it. She should have left it alone. Instead, she laughed. "Come on, Victor. After all this time, you're still keeping secrets from me. What do you have back there, bodies?" The joke hung in the air for a moment too long. Victor turned from the stove, his expression unreadable. "Something's burning," Sophia said, pointing. Victor cursed under his breath and turned back to salvage the sauce. In that brief moment of distraction, Sophia made a decision that would seal her fate. She walked toward the steel door. The lock was engaged, but the key hung on a hook nearby, poorly hidden behind a calendar. Her heart pounding with a mixture of wine-fueled boldness and genuine curiosity, Sophia grabbed it. Victor, focused on his cooking and assuming she would respect his boundaries, didn't notice. The key turned smoothly. The door swung open to reveal stairs descending into darkness. Sophia hesitated. This was crossing a line, violating Victor's trust in a way that might end their relationship. But the wine and her natural recklessness pushed her forward. She found a light switch and descended the stairs, her heels clicking against concrete. The basement was cold, much colder than the kitchen above. Industrial refrigeration units hummed against the walls. And in the center of the room stood a large stainless steel table, its surface stained with something dark that no amount of cleaning could fully remove. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't a wine cellar or a storage area for dry goods. This was a butchering room, complete with hanging hooks, industrial saws, and a drainage system built into the sloped floor. Sophia's hands trembled as she approached a large freezer against the far wall. "Don't open it," a voice in her head screamed. But her body moved on autopilot. Inside the freezer were dozens of vacuum-sealed packages, neatly stacked and labeled. But these weren't labeled with cuts of beef or pork. They were labeled with names and dates. Marcus Chen, thigh, February 2024. Jennifer Blake, ribs, November 2023. Sophia's vision blurred as her brain struggled to process what she was seeing. Her own hand reached out, trembling, to grab one of the packages. Through the plastic, she could see it clearly. Human flesh, preserved and prepared like any other meat. The wine glass slipped from her other hand, shattering on the concrete floor. The sound echoed through the basement like a gunshot. Upstairs, the rhythmic chopping stopped. "Sophia?" Victor's voice called down, his tone still friendly, but with an undertone that made her blood freeze. "Where did you go, baby?" Sophia couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Her mind raced through the past 8 months. Every meal she had eaten at La Perla Negra, every time Victor had insisted she try his special preparations. Nausea rolled through her stomach. She had eaten here dozens of times. She had praised the unique flavor of his dishes. "Oh God," she thought, her knees buckling. "What have I been eating?" Footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate. Victor appeared at the bottom, still holding his chef's knife. His expression was no longer warm or loving. It was cold, calculating. The same look he probably wore when he worked at this very table. "You couldn't just trust me," he said quietly. "You had to know everything." Sophia backed away, her heel crunching on broken glass. "Victor, please." "I won't tell anyone." "I swear," he shook his head slowly. "You're already asking questions around town, Sophia. People are noticing. You think I don't hear about it?" His voice remained calm, almost sad. "I really liked you. This wasn't how I wanted tonight to end." Sophia's back hit the cold metal of the freezer. There was nowhere left to go. She had walked down these stairs on her own, locked herself in this tomb with a monster she had mistaken for a man. Victor moved closer, the knife glinting under the fluorescent lights. "You wanted to know my secrets," he said. "Now you do. And just like everyone else who learned the truth, you're going to become part of the menu." Sophia opened her mouth to scream, but Victor was faster, his hand clamping over her face with bruising force. The last thing she saw before the knife flashed was her own reflection in the polished steel of the freezer door. Her eyes wide, with the terrible understanding of what was about to happen. The struggle lasted less than 30 seconds. Sophia fought with the desperation of someone who understood exactly what was happening, clawing at Victor's arms, trying to twist away from the blade. But Victor had spent his entire life mastering the control of living things that didn't want to die. His father had taught him that the key to a clean kill was commitment. Hesitation only prolonged suffering and created mess. The knife found its mark just below her ribcage, angled upward toward the heart. Victor had made this cut hundreds of times on deer and gators in the Everglades. The human body wasn't so different. Sophia's eyes went wide, her mouth opening in a silent gasp as her lungs failed to draw air. Victor held her against him almost tenderly as the life drained from her body. Feeling her pulse flutter and fade beneath his fingers, when she finally went limp, Victor lowered her carefully onto the stainless steel table. He stood there for a moment, looking at her face. Even in death, Sophia was beautiful. Her makeup was smeared, mascara tracking down her cheeks from tears she had shed in those final terrified moments. Victor felt something almost like regret, but it passed quickly. Emotion was a luxury he couldn't afford. She had made her choice when she opened that freezer door. He removed his shirt, not wanting to stain it, and retrieved the heavy rubber apron hanging on a hook near the industrial sink. This was familiar work, almost meditative. Victor had always found a strange peace in butchery, in the systematic reduction of something complex into its essential components. There was honesty in it. No pretense, no lies, just the fundamental truth of meat and bone. The first cuts were always the most important. Victor began with the major limbs, working at the joints where separation required skill rather than brute force. His knives were German steel, kept razor sharp, and they sliced through tendon and cartilage with minimal resistance. He worked methodically, his movements efficient and practiced. The legs first, separated at the hip and knee. Then the arms at the shoulder and elbow. Blood pooled on the table and ran down the drainage channel Victor had installed specifically for this purpose, flowing into a specialized filtration system that broke down biological material before it entered Miami's sewer system. Nothing could be traced back to him. He had thought of everything, planned for every contingency, except for Sophia's curiosity. That had been his only miscalculation. As he worked, Victor's mind was already planning the next steps. Sophia would need to be reported missing, but not by him. Their affair was secret, known only to a few people who had reasons to stay quiet. Her phone was in her purse upstairs. He would need to create a digital trail, showing her alive and well after leaving the restaurant. A few texts to friends, maybe a social media post scheduled to go live tomorrow. Make it look like she had simply moved on, maybe left Miami for a fresh start somewhere else. The torso required more delicate work. Victor removed the organs first, placing them in a separate container for disposal. They would be dissolved in lye, a process that took time but left nothing behind. The remaining meat, however, was pristine. Sophia had taken good care of herself, eating organic foods, working out regularly. The muscle tissue was firm and well marbled. Waste not, want not. His father's voice echoed in his memory. It took Victor 4 hours to completely process Sophia's body. By the time he finished, nothing remained that resembled a human being. Instead, neatly wrapped packages lined the freezer shelves, each vacuum-sealed and labeled with coded dates that only Victor could decipher. To anyone else, they would look like expensive cuts from an exotic game supplier, which, in a darkly ironic way, they were. Victor cleaned the basement with the same meticulous attention he brought to everything else. Every surface was scrubbed with industrial cleaners, then sanitized with bleach. The floor was mopped 3 times. The table was scoured until it gleamed. By dawn, the basement looked exactly as it had before Sophia descended those stairs. Sterile, cold, and empty of evidence. Upstairs, Victor disposed of Sophia's purse, keeping only her phone. He used her fingerprint, still viable on her lifeless hand, before rigor mortis set in to unlock the device. Scrolling through her messages, he composed careful text to her closest friends. I need some time to clear my head. Taking a trip up the coast. Don't worry about me. He scheduled several Instagram posts from her drafts folder, making it appear she was still active and alive. The sun was rising over Biscayne Bay when Victor finally allowed himself to rest. He stood in his penthouse shower, watching pink-tinged water swirl down the drain. His body ached from hours of physical labor, but his mind was clear. Sophia was gone. The problem was solved. La Perla Negra would continue to thrive, and Miami's elite would continue to praise his culinary genius, never knowing the true source of his success. 3 days later, Victor introduced a new special to the menu. Pan-seared medallions with a red wine reduction, served over truffle risotto. The meat was incredibly tender, the flavor rich and complex. Customers raved about it. One food blogger posted a review calling it transcendent, unlike anything she had ever tasted. A wealthy couple from Coral Gables came back 3 nights in a row just to order the dish again. Victor watched from his usual spot near the open kitchen, accepting compliments with his characteristic charm. He noticed how people closed their eyes when they took the first bite, savoring the taste. How they leaned back in their chairs with satisfied sighs. How they asked their servers what made this particular meat so exceptional. Victor always had the same answer, delivered with a knowing smile. It's all about the quality of the source. You can't replicate that with just any supplier. Rosa, his head chef, commented on the new inventory one morning while preparing for lunch service. "This meat is incredible, Victor. Where did you get it?" Victor was chopping vegetables, his movements precise and controlled. "A private source," he said without looking up. "Very exclusive. We won't be able to get more for a while, so make sure nothing goes to waste." Rosa nodded, returning her attention to the stove. She had learned long ago not to push Victor on matters he didn't want to discuss. But while Victor believed he had perfectly covered his tracks, he had made one critical error. In his focus on Sophia's digital footprint and physical remains, he had overlooked something simple. Sophia's best friend, a paralegal named Christina, had been tracking Sophia's location through a shared app on their phones. It was something they had set up for safety after a mutual friend had been assaulted on a date. Christina noticed that Sophia's last known location, before her phone went offline, had been La Perla Negra, and while Sophia's subsequent texts claimed she was traveling, Christina found them strange. The wording was off, too formal. Sophia always used excessive emojis and abbreviations. These messages were different. Christina's instincts told her something was wrong. She tried calling Victor, but he didn't answer. She drove by the restaurant, watching from across the street as Victor worked through dinner service, laughing and charming customers as if nothing had happened. Christina didn't go to the police immediately. She had no proof, just a feeling. But she started asking questions, reaching out to Sophia's other friends, checking if anyone had actually heard from her directly. No one had. Every contact had been through text. And when Christina called Sophia's family in Tampa, she learned they were also worried. Sophia had missed her mother's birthday, something she would never do without explanation. Cristina Martinez had worked as a paralegal for 6 years, long enough to understand how investigations worked and how criminals made mistakes. She knew that going to the Miami Police Department with nothing but a gut feeling would accomplish nothing. Cops dealt with facts, evidence, timelines. What Christina had were suspicions and a friend who had supposedly left town without saying goodbye in person. She began her own investigation, starting with Sophia's social media. The posts looked normal on the surface, beach photos and sunset shots with captions about finding herself. But Christina noticed something odd. Every photo was generic, the kind of stock images that could have been taken anywhere in Florida. None showed Sophia's face clearly. And the geotags were vague, just Florida coast, rather than specific locations Sophia always tagged. Christina created a timeline on her laptop, documenting everything she knew. Sophia's last confirmed sighting was entering La Perla Negra at 7:15 on that Wednesday evening. Her phone's location services showed her there until nearly midnight. Then the device went offline. The texts began the next morning, all sent during a 3-hour window. After that, nothing but scheduled social media posts. The more Christina dug, the more convinced she became that something terrible had happened. She reached out to Sophia's client list from her real estate job. Several mentioned that Sophia had appointments scheduled for the week after her disappearance, appointments she never showed up for. That wasn't like her. Sophia was meticulous about her career, never missing opportunities to close deals. Christina needed to get inside that restaurant to see what Victor was hiding. But she couldn't just walk in asking questions. Victor would become defensive, and if he really had done something to Sophia, he would cover his tracks even more carefully. She needed a different approach. That's when Christina remembered that La Perla Negra was hiring. She had seen the posting online, looking for a new server to handle their expanding dinner reservations. Within a week, Christina had fabricated a resume with fake restaurant experience and landed an interview. Victor himself conducted it, sitting across from her in an empty dining room during the afternoon lull. Christina kept her voice steady, her smile professional, giving no indication that she had any connection to Sophia. She talked about her passion for fine dining, her experience handling difficult customers, her willingness to work late nights. Victor studied her carefully. his dark eyes searching for something. Christina held his gaze, projecting confidence and eagerness. After 15 minutes, Victor nodded. "You start Thursday," he said. "Rosa will train you. Don't be late." As Christina left the restaurant, her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She was in. The first 2 weeks working at La Perla Negra were torture for Christina. She had to act normal, serving tables and learning the menu while searching for any opportunity to investigate. She watched Victor constantly, noting his patterns and routines. He was always in control, always watching his staff, with an intensity that made everyone slightly nervous. The kitchen was his kingdom, and no one entered the basement area near the back. Rosa had mentioned it once during training. "Storage down there," she said. "Victor handles all of that himself. We don't go near it." Christina volunteered for every closing shift she could, hoping to catch Victor alone. But he was always the last one to leave, methodically checking locks and setting alarms. She tried chatting with other staff members, fishing for information about Victor's personal life. Most knew nothing. He was intensely private, professional, but distant. Only Rosa had worked with him long enough to know anything substantial, and she was fiercely loyal. Then Christina got her first real break. She was cleaning tables one night after closing when she overheard Victor on his phone in the kitchen. His voice was low and tense, speaking Spanish rapidly. Christina's own Spanish was decent, learned from her grandmother. She strained to hear. The conversation was cryptic, but she caught certain phrases. "The situation is handled. No more problems. The inventory is clean." After Victor left that night, Christina made a decision. She had copied Victor's office key weeks ago, using a putty mold technique she had learned from a private investigator her law firm sometimes used. Now she would use it. The office was small, just a desk and filing cabinets, but it might contain something useful. Christina's hands shook as she unlocked the door, listening for any sound that might indicate Victor had returned. The filing cabinets were mostly legitimate business records, invoices, payroll documents, health inspection reports. But in the bottom drawer of the desk, hidden beneath a false bottom, Christina found a ledger. It was handwritten in Victor's neat script, filled with dates, names, and codes she didn't understand. But several entries caught her attention. They were marked with red ink and included payments listed as disposal fees. Christina photographed every page with her phone, her pulse racing. She didn't know exactly what she was looking at, but it was clearly something Victor wanted hidden. She replaced everything exactly as she had found it and relocked the door. As she left through the back exit, she nearly ran into someone. Carlos, a man she had seen talking with Victor several times, always late at night in the alley. He looked at her suspiciously. "You're here late," he said, his accent thick. "Just forgot my phone," Christina lied, holding up the device. Carlos's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, just watched as she hurried to her car. Christina knew she had pushed her luck too far. Carlos would probably mention seeing her to Victor, and Victor would start asking questions. She needed to move faster. The next morning, she took the ledger photos to a retired detective she had met through work, a man named Robert Hayes, who now worked as a private investigator. He studied the images carefully, his expression growing darker with each page. "This is bad," Hayes said finally. "These aren't business records. These are tracking documents. See these codes? They're likely connected to specific individuals. And these dates match up with several missing persons reports filed in Miami over the past 3 years. Christina felt sick. "How many?" she asked. Hayes counted silently. "Based on what's here, at least 15. Maybe more." Hayes advised Christina to go to the police immediately, but she refused. "They won't believe this," she insisted. "It's just a ledger with codes. We need physical evidence." Hayes sighed heavily. "If this guy is what I think he is, getting physical evidence means going into that basement. And if he catches you—" Christina's voice was firm despite her fear. "Sophia was my best friend. I'm not letting him get away with this. They developed a plan. Hayes would create a distraction, a fake health inspection that would require Victor to meet with officials at a downtown office. Christina would use that window to search the basement. It was risky and probably illegal, but Christina was past caring about procedure. She wanted justice for Sophia and for whoever else Victor had hurt. The day came 2 weeks later. Hayes, posing as a city health official, called Victor demanding an immediate meeting about violations at the restaurant. Victor was furious but had no choice except to comply. He left Rosa in charge and drove downtown. Christina waited 30 minutes, then told Rosa she was feeling sick and needed to go home early. Rosa, distracted by the lunch rush, barely acknowledged her. Christina circled back, entering through the delivery entrance she had deliberately left unlocked earlier. The restaurant was busy upstairs. The kitchen staff focused on orders. No one noticed as she slipped down the corridor toward the steel door. Her copied key worked on the first lock, but there was also a digital keypad. Christina had watched Victor punch in the code several times from a distance, memorizing the pattern. 62839. The lock clicked open. The stairs descended into darkness, and Christina had to use her phone's flashlight to navigate. The temperature dropped dramatically with each step, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. At the bottom, she found the light switch and flooded the basement with harsh fluorescent brightness that made her squint. What she saw made her stomach drop. This wasn't a storage room or wine cellar. This was a butchering facility, complete with industrial equipment that belonged in a slaughterhouse, not beneath an upscale restaurant. The stainless steel table in the center dominated the space, its surface bearing faint stains that no amount of scrubbing could fully erase. Hanging hooks lined one wall. Saws and knives of various sizes hung from magnetic strips. Everything was meticulously organized, clinically clean, terrifying in its efficiency. Christina forced herself to move deeper into the room, documenting everything with her phone's camera. She photographed the table, the tools, the drainage system built into the floor. Then she saw the large commercial freezer humming against the far wall. Her hands trembled as she approached it, every instinct screaming at her to run. But she had come this far. She needed proof. The freezer door opened with a hydraulic hiss. Inside, the temperature was Arctic, well below zero. And stacked neatly on industrial shelving were dozens of vacuum-sealed packages. Christina grabbed the nearest one, her fingers already going numb from the cold. Through the plastic, she could see meat, dark red and carefully portioned. But the label made her blood freeze colder than the air around her. It wasn't labeled beef or pork or venison. Instead, in Victor's precise handwriting, it read, SR Tenderloin 03/27/24. Christina's mind raced. SR Sophia Reyes. The date was just days after Sophia had disappeared. Christina's knees buckled, and she had to grab the freezer shelf to keep from collapsing. This was Sophia. This package contained pieces of her best friend. Bile rose in Christina's throat, but she forced it down. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands and photographed the package, then several others. The labels were all similar, initials and dates and cut specifications. Marcus Chen, Jennifer Blake, names she recognized from missing persons reports Hayes had shown her. Victor hadn't just killed these people. He had butchered them like animals and stored them like inventory. Then Christina saw something that made her pause. Several packages were labeled Menu 04-15-24 and Menu 04-22-24. Her mind struggled to process the implication before the horrible truth crashed over her. Victor wasn't just disposing of bodies. He was serving them. Those special menu items that customers raved about, the unique flavor profiles that food critics praised. They were human flesh. Christina doubled over and vomited on the freezer floor, her body rejecting the knowledge of what she had just discovered. She had eaten at La Perla Negra during her training. She had tried the staff meal Victor prepared. The thought of what might have been in that food made her retch again. How many people had unknowingly consumed human meat? How many tourists, families, couples celebrating anniversaries had participated in Victor's cannibalistic nightmare without ever knowing? She took more photos. her fingers barely responding through the cold and shock. She needed irrefutable evidence, enough that the police couldn't ignore or dismiss her claims. She was about to close the freezer when she noticed a small box on the bottom shelf. Inside were personal items, jewelry, watches, phones with cracked screens and dead batteries, trophies from victims. And there, nestled among the collection, was Sophia's distinctive silver bracelet, the one with turquoise stones that she never took off. Christina grabbed the bracelet, clutching it to her chest as tears streamed down her face. Sophia had been her friend since high school. They had shared everything, protected each other, celebrated each other's successes. And Victor had reduced her to labeled packages in a freezer, served her to strangers who complimented the taste. The rage that surged through Christina burned away the fear and nausea. Victor wouldn't get away with this. She would make sure of it. But as she turned to leave the freezer, she heard something that made her heart stop. Footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that could only belong to one person. Victor's voice echoed through the basement, cold and devoid of emotion. "You should have stayed out of my business, Christina." Christina's mind raced. She was trapped in the freezer with only one exit, and Victor was blocking it. She could see him now, standing at the base of the stairs, still wearing his chef's jacket. In his hand was a large butcher's knife, the blade catching the fluorescent light. His expression was calm, almost disappointed, like a teacher catching a student cheating on an exam. "How long have you known?" Victor asked, moving slowly toward the freezer. Christina backed deeper inside, the cold burning her lungs with each breath. Since Sophia disappeared, she managed to say, her voice steadier than she felt. "I know what you did to her. I know what you've done to all of them." Victor nodded thoughtfully. She was asking too many questions. "Just like you. Why couldn't you both just mind your own business?" Christina's hand closed around a frozen package, the only weapon available to her. Victor laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the steel walls. "You think that will stop me? I've been doing this since I was 12 years old. My father taught me that survival means doing what others can't stomach. You're just another problem that needs solving." He lunged forward, the knife arcing toward Christina's chest. She threw the frozen package at his face, and it connected with a solid thunk. Victor stumbled back, more surprised than hurt, but it gave Christina the seconds she needed. She bolted past him, running for the stairs. Her feet slipped on the smooth concrete, and she fell hard, pain shooting through her knee. Behind her, Victor was recovering, wiping blood from a cut on his forehead where the package had struck him. Christina scrambled up the stairs on her hands and knees, adrenaline overriding the pain. She could hear Victor behind her, his footsteps steady and unhurried. He knew the layout, knew every exit, knew she was trapped. But Christina had one advantage. She had left the steel door unlocked, and beyond it was the kitchen, where Rosa and the other staff were working through lunch service. She burst through the door into the kitchen, screaming. Rosa turned from the stove, her face shocked. "Call 911, Christina shrieked. "He's a killer. He's been killing people." The kitchen staff froze, staring at her like she had lost her mind. And then Victor emerged from the basement doorway, his knife still in hand, his expression twisted with rage. The scene erupted into chaos. Rosa screamed. Two line cooks grabbed whatever was nearby, pans and rolling pins, forming a barrier between Victor and Christina. Customers in the dining room heard the commotion and stood up, phones out, some already dialing emergency services. Victor realized in that moment that everything was over. His carefully constructed empire, his reputation, his freedom, all of it crumbling because one woman wouldn't let her friend's disappearance go. Victor stood in his kitchen, surrounded by his staff and armed with a knife, and for the first time in his life he had no plan. The sirens were already wailing in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Customers flooded toward the exits, their faces pale with terror. Victor's mind calculated the possibilities, running through scenarios the way he always did. But every path led to the same conclusion. There was no escape. He looked at Christina, still backed against the wall, protected by Rosa and the line cooks. The girl had destroyed everything he had built. Years of careful planning, meticulous execution, perfect control, all unraveled by one person who refused to accept a convenient lie. Victor felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood in the Everglades. Genuine fear. The Miami Police Department arrived in force. 6 patrol cars blocking off the street outside La Perla Negra. Officers poured into the restaurant with weapons drawn, shouting commands. Victor dropped the knife, raising his hands slowly. He knew when a fight was lost. As the officers cuffed him and read him his rights, Victor kept his eyes on Christina. She stared back, her face streaked with tears, but her expression fierce. "You're going to pay for what you did to Sophia," she said. To all of them. The investigation that followed was the largest and most disturbing in Miami's history. Detective Sara Gonzalez led the task force that descended on La Perla Negra and Victor's penthouse. What they discovered in the basement freezer confirmed Christina's accusations and exceeded their worst nightmares. Forensic teams spent 3 days cataloging the contents, matching DNA from the packages to missing persons reports dating back 4 years. The final count was staggering. 19 victims, ranging in age from 23 to 47. Most were people on the margins of society, individuals whose disappearances hadn't triggered major investigations. Homeless veterans, undocumented immigrants, sex workers, people Victor had targeted specifically because he knew no one would look too hard for them. But there were also people like Sophia, whose curiosity or knowledge had made them liabilities. The medical examiner's report revealed something even more disturbing. Analysis of Victor's restaurant inventory and comparison with customer receipts suggested that over 3,000 people had unknowingly consumed human flesh at La Perla Negra, the special menu items that customers had raved about, the dishes that had earned Victor his reputation. They had all contained meat from his victims. The city of Miami erupted into hysteria. The story dominated national news for weeks. Customers who had eaten at La Perla Negra flooded hospitals and psychiatric clinics, many unable to cope with the knowledge of what they had consumed. Support groups formed for traumatized diners. Lawsuits were filed, though no amount of money could undo the psychological damage. Several regular customers, people who had eaten there dozens of times, required intensive therapy and medication to manage their trauma. Food critics who had praised Victor's cooking publicly apologized and deleted their reviews. But the internet never forgets. Their old articles circulated endlessly, dissected by true crime enthusiasts and armchair detectives. The Miami Herald published a devastating investigative piece detailing how Victor had bribed health inspectors and cultivated relationships with organized crime figures who supplied him with some of his victims in exchange for disposal services. Victor's trial began 8 months after his arrest. The prosecution had an overwhelming amount of evidence: the freezer contents, DNA matches, Victor's ledgers, testimony from Christina, and even receipts showing unusual meat purchases that didn't match any legitimate suppliers. The defense attorney, a public defender who clearly wanted nothing to do with the case, attempted an insanity plea. It was rejected within hours. Psychiatric evaluations showed Victor was perfectly sane, just completely devoid of empathy or remorse. The courtroom was packed every day, with victims' families occupying the front rows. Sophia's mother attended every session, clutching the turquoise bracelet Christina had recovered. When asked to testify, Christina provided a detailed account of her investigation and the moment she discovered the freezer's contents. Her voice never wavered, even when describing the package labeled with her best friend's initials. Victor showed no emotion throughout the trial. He sat calmly at the defense table, occasionally taking notes, looking more bored than concerned. When given the opportunity to speak, he declined. His attorney advised him to show remorse, to apologize to the families, to give the court some reason for leniency. Victor refused. There was nothing to apologize for, he told his lawyer. I was good at what I did. People loved my food. That's all that matters. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts: 19 counts of first-degree murder, desecration of human remains, operating an unsanitary food establishment, and a dozen other charges. The judge, a stern woman named Barbara Morrison, showed no mercy during sentencing. "Victor Castellanos, you are a predator who violated the most fundamental bonds of human society. You turned sustenance into horror, nourishment into nightmare. You will spend the rest of your natural life in prison without the possibility of parole." Victor was transferred to Florida State Prison, where he was immediately placed in protective custody. Even among criminals, cannibals occupied the lowest tier. Multiple inmates had already threatened his life. Victor adapted to prison the same way he had adapted to everything else in his life, with cold efficiency. He worked in the kitchen, naturally, though under constant supervision, and never allowed near meat products. Christina tried to return to her normal life, but nothing was normal anymore. She quit her paralegal job, unable to focus on mundane legal documents after what she had experienced. Sophia's family thanked her repeatedly, grateful that their daughter's killer had been brought to justice, but Christina felt no sense of victory. Sophia was still gone, reduced to labeled packages in a freezer, consumed by strangers who would never even know her name. The building that housed La Perla Negra was demolished 8 months after Victor's conviction. No one wanted to operate a business in a location synonymous with such horror. The lot remained empty, a vacant space in Miami's Wynwood district that locals avoided. Some claimed it was haunted, that they could smell cooking meat late at night when nothing was there. Urban legends grew around the location. Stories whispered to tourists about the chef who served human burgers. Victor gave only one interview, 2 years into his sentence, to a criminal psychologist writing a book about serial killers. When asked if he felt any remorse, Victor's response was chilling. "Remorse for what? I gave people exactly what they wanted. They came to my restaurant looking for an extraordinary experience, and that's what I provided. The fact that they didn't know what they were eating doesn't change the fact that they enjoyed it. If anything, I proved that humans are fundamentally hypocritical. They're horrified by cannibalism in theory, but in practice, they loved it." The psychologist asked if Victor understood why his actions were wrong. Victor smiled, that same cold smile he had worn in his kitchen. "Wrong is a matter of perspective. Lions eat gazelles. Humans eat cows. I just expanded the menu. The only thing I did wrong was getting caught." Christina eventually moved away from Miami, settling in North Carolina where no one knew her story. She changed her name legally, trying to leave behind the woman who had discovered a freezer full of human remains. But the nightmares never stopped. She still saw Sophia's face, still heard Victor's calm voice explaining why he felt no guilt. Some scars, Christina learned, never fully heal. The families of Victor's victims found what closure they could. Several bodies were reconstructed enough for proper burials. Others had memorial services with empty caskets. Sophia's mother planted a garden in her daughter's memory, growing flowers that bloomed each spring. It wasn't enough, would never be enough, but it was something tangible to hold on to in the face of incomprehensible loss. Victor Castellanos remained in prison, serving 19 consecutive life sentences. He cooked breakfast for other inmates, always under supervision, his knives restricted to plastic. Sometimes late at night in his cell, he thought about La Perla Negra, about the perfect sear on a steak, about customers closing their eyes in pleasure at that first bite. He felt no regret for what he had done, only regret that it had ended. Because in Victor's mind, he hadn't been a monster. He had been an artist, and his medium just happened to be flesh and bone. The story of Victor Castellanos became a cautionary tale, a reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself with obvious signs. Sometimes it smiles at you from behind a restaurant counter, serves you a beautiful plate, and accepts your compliments with practiced grace. And sometimes the most horrifying truth is that we never know what we're really consuming, what darkness we're unknowingly participating in, until someone brave enough or desperate enough pulls back the curtain and forces us to see what was hidden in plain sight all along.